fit. My heater is blowing cold air. I don't know. That's not good, is it? It's kind of ironic, right? The heater stopped working when the weather got cold. Unless I've accidentally got it on cool. Let's see. Hare Krishna. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. I'm all wrapped up in the holy name, which is good, right? Isn't it? I have to rewrap in the holy name. Do we have anything left from last week in terms of the suggestions? No. So if you remember last week, we were discussing, we're going to continue to discuss. We were discussing Prabhupada and how his example inspires us. And we were asking you all for some suggestions of examples of Prabhupada and how we could relate to them, be inspired by them. You remember? So I suggested a few examples, and then you suggested some examples, and I wanted to continue. And in order for you to suggest an example, you don't have to connect how that example we can apply it. Maybe you don't know, but you can just think of the example. But the idea is we're going to look at examples that I believe perhaps we've overlooked in terms of how they can move us in our lives. And I want to make that connection. Because the point we were making last week is that you'll read some Leela of Prabhupada and you'll be like, well, that's Prabhupada, and you move on to your breakfast. And nothing really happened. Whereas we want to make this connection of how that example of Prabhupada can actually deeply affect us in our bhakti, really can change us or change our heart or whatever. So that's the goal. Are you ready? On your mark, get set, raise your hand. I'm going to give you time to think. If you raise your hand, it means you have an example. I'm going to give you time to think. We don't need that example yet, Chaitanya Dasi. That's when I wrote an offering about all these examples Prabhupada said. And so when we run out of you giving examples or me remembering examples, then we'll bring that document up. So I was reading this morning a section of the Lilamrita about the opening of the Vrindavan temple. You might know the story. The Vrindavan temple opened in April of 1975, but Prabhupada was initially told it was going to be ready in, I'm not sure what part of, maybe Kartik 1974, maybe spring, I forget. Maybe it was like Gorpurnim 1974. I forget. No, it was August. Janmashtami. Brain is working still. Aren't you happy? I could remember that. I'm not that old yet. Um, I'm not that old that I forgot all your names. You know, that could happen. What's your name? Can you tell me? I forgot. So it was August. It was meant to open on Janmashtami, 1974. And the temple president didn't want to tell Prabhupada that it wasn't ready. That like they didn't, the government of India was rationing out cement. I don't know why, but they couldn't get enough cement and building materials and so forth. So Prabhupada sent a GBC to India, and the GBC, when he saw everything, wrote Prabhupada, and this was the first person who wrote Prabhupada, and said, this temple is never going to be ready. And invitations were already sent out to dignitaries, sannyasis, godbrothers of Prabhupada. And Prabhupada invited the general devotees. And Prabhupada was furious, as would you, as you would be as well. But there's a little backstory to this, which is a backstory to practically everything Prabhupada was doing. When you read Lilamrita, there's a theme that comes up, at least for me. When you read about the projects that Prabhupada was doing, you might think, especially if you're a manager, you might think, how can he do this? He doesn't have enough men, he doesn't have enough qualified men, and he doesn't have enough money. How can he? It's like, it's impossible. You're trying to win a race with a car that only runs on two cylinders. Like, how do you do this? And so, if you look at Prabhupada's life and the projects that he was developing, on paper, it was like, this is impossible. We don't have the money, we don't have the men, and we don't have the men that have experience doing like building temples, etc. And that's basically how Prabhupada did everything. And he was determined to make it happen, even though they didn't have the resources. And I'm sure you had experience when you had to do something and your thought was, how do we do it? We don't have the resources. And the example that Prabhupada gave, and I don't know that we can imitate it exactly, but in Prabhupada's mind, if something was important, it would just have to be done. He would just tell his disciples, just do it. After they were fumbling around and they couldn't do it, and he would just say, just do it. It has to be done, do it. And I think Prabhupada had faith that if you have that kind of determination, it will happen. But he had no choice. I mean, that's another thing, right? Like, you have to get something done. You have $100 and two fools, and you need five intelligent people and $1 million, but you have to get it done. So we're going to do it somehow. Krishna will help. That was Prabhupada's mood. And it's difficult. It's difficult to do that because when you try to do that, there's so many problems and headaches. And if you read Lilamrita, you'll see. There were so many headaches Prabhupada had to go through due to this fact that he was trying to get something done without sufficiently trained, intelligent, qualified people and without the money. Somehow or other he got the money, he always said. Don't worry, the money will come. Krishna will provide it. And often things are so difficult that his leaders would just quit in the middle. They would just walk out. I can't do this. It was so hard. Like so when they went to Bombay, I don't know if you know the story, but when they went to Bombay, they moved onto the property, but there was nowhere to live because all the apartments on the property were occupied by residents, and you couldn't ask the residents to leave. That was the law. So they built little huts, and the devotees were living in the huts, but the huts were rat infested and mosquito infested, and everybody was getting sick. And I don't know what they used for a toilet. And it was so difficult that periodically devotees would say, I can't do this, and they would just leave to like go back to America. And so Prabhupada's mood was like, we're going to do this. So where are we going to live? We'll build a hut and we'll sleep next to the rats. And certain kinds of rats bite you and you get infected because I was bitten by a rat when I was in Mauritius, and you don't feel it, but you wake up and wherever they bit you is inflamed and infected, and you feel sick, tired. Hare Krishna. What to speak of malaria from the mosquitoes? I just read a story. Prabhupada had malaria in Vrindavan, and like all his servants had malaria, like everybody had malaria. I mean, this is, if you heard now there was, well, malaria is always there in India, but I heard now you just take one medicine and it goes away and like presume and it's gone. But in those days, I guess they didn't have that medicine. And so if you knew there was malaria in Vrindavan and everybody's getting it, you probably wouldn't go, right? That's common sense. But they had to build a temple. So it was like, whatever. Malaria, no malaria, whatever. One time, Sridhar had, I think he had jaundice. Prabhupada said, what are the symptoms? And he said, this, that, and the next thing. And Prabhupada said, I always feel like that. Maybe I have jaundice also. Prabhupada was joking. That's like the normal state of an old man. I always feel like that and I'm going on. So, um, so what we see, because this is constant throughout Prabhupada's whole time in preaching Krishna consciousness. This is a constant theme that he had ambitions to do things which kind of materially were not, you could say, logical based on the resources we had. And he just did it because it had to be done. So at least this is something we can remember when we have service and we don't have proper resources. But if the service is important and we have the vision and we feel like, no, this must be done, somehow or other, like Krishna helps, sends people, sends money, through the back door, not through the front door. I was reading Leela Amrita. When I was recuperating, like I had devotees read to me, and we were reading Leela Amrita, and sometimes I would say, stop reading, it's putting me in anxiety because Prabhupada was like trying to do the impossible. And there were so many problems. I was like, I can't hear this. It's just like, I'm seriously, I was like in anxiety listening to it because when you try to do something that's impossible without enough money and people, you obviously run into problems because of that. So if you read Leela Amrita, you'll see it's so many things that Prabhupada was doing, especially in India, these big projects. There's so many problems and headaches, especially in those days in India. I mean, those days in India, just to like do anything was a problem. It was so, you know, unsophisticated materially, especially for a foreigner who's used to doing things a certain way. And so it's like, it's almost like the way Prabhupada had to do it just breeded problems. Like you don't have enough money, you don't have qualified people. His disciples are getting cheated all the time. They're buying cement, but the cement is it was mixed with other stuff. And they built columns with this bogus cement, and the columns all just fell apart after a few days, just crumbled. Like, how would you know? That wouldn't happen in the West, right? It says cement, it's cement. But India is different, and the Westerners wouldn't know that. So Prabhupada is telling them, you're being cheated all the time. You don't realize it because you're a Westerner and people see they can cheat you. So how frustrating it was for Prabhupada. So he had to deal with so many problems. Um, and especially if you read the story of Juhu. That was one endless headache. And everybody was ready to give up, and nobody, there were so many obstacles. Nobody thought this is a good idea, except Prabhupada. Everybody was like, this place is in the middle of nowhere. There's one headache after another. Like, why are we doing this? And Prabhupada said when he was a Grihasta, he saw that land and he said, this land would be an ideal place for a temple. And it was in the middle of nowhere. Now Juhu is the middle of everywhere. It's a prestigious place. There's hotels all around it. Wealthy people live there. The movie stars live in the neighborhood. And Prabhupada could see that. So for Prabhupada, there was like no question of it not happening. So I might as well turn off the cool air, right? What do you think? And hope that hot air comes out tomorrow. You know how that is, at night you put it on and it works. Then you come back in the morning and turn it on and it doesn't. I think the heater is freezing. It's freezing because it's cold outside. So I've decided it's too cold to heat. All right, don't go away. There are more options. Okay. My trusted fan, space heater. Can you hear it blowing? Or yeah, Zoom. Zoom is good. It removes all the background noise. Okay. So when you try to do projects and you don't have all the facility you need, do you run into all kinds of problems? And you're not paying anybody. So people just like in the middle, sorry, I can't do this. I'm burned out. And they walk away. Even sometimes the leaders walk away. People in charge of them, it's like, I can't do this. So the real moral of these stories is that Prabhupada's desire to do these projects was so strong. His desire to spread Krishna consciousness was so strong that didn't matter. He just had to do it. And somehow or other, I guess we could say that he knew Krishna would help. Or like, this has to manifest for the pleasure of my Guru Maharaj. And so I think that at least what we can garner from these stories is that when you have to do something, as you will, maybe you've never done it before, or you don't have the resources, you can think of these stories. If you look at the history of ISKCON, Prabhupada gave devotees service to do things they'd never done before. Okay, now we have to publish books. I'm like, oh, what's that all about? All I do is read books. I've never published one. No, now you have to publish. Krishna will give you intelligence. Just do it. And so that's basically the history of ISKCON. It wasn't like, okay, Juliana, I want you to publish one of my books. And I found this course on Udemy or something, how to publish a book. And Prabhupada never said that. It was just like, just publish it. And when the artist wanted to like take training, he said, no, just keep painting. Krishna will give you intelligence. He'll provide the ability. So it's not, that we do something that's really important, like, heart surgery without training. But for many of the services that Prabhupada gave us, it was like, just do it. Krishna will guide you. Of course, we often messed up. That's for sure. So there's a balance here, like, okay, you're going to be a Gurukul teacher. Why do you want me to be a Gurukul? Well, we sent you out on Sankirtan and you weren't good. So we're going to make you a Gurukul teacher. So your qualification for being a Gurukul teacher was your collections on Sankirtan were lower than everyone else's. I'm not making this up. This is how it happened. Well, you're not a good cook. You don't like pujari work. You can't distribute books. What's left for you? Oh, you'll be a Gurukul teacher. So I'm not saying like that. Because sometimes when you're asked to do a service and you realize that you'll destroy the life of somebody, either you need training or you just need to deny it. But um, but anyway, there's a principle there that Prabhupada was determined to do things, and it's really incredible. If you read Leela Amrita with this angle of vision, you'll see like everything basically was impossible. There was nothing that was like, oh yeah, I just take some ex-hippies, get them to chant 16 rounds, and send them to a city, 3 months after they've been in the temple to open a new temple and make people Krishna conscious. Huh? What? What are you talking about? Like nowadays, if you've been a devotee a year and I said, now you go out and start a temple, you'd say, no, at least 10 years or at least 5. And, where's the money to start the temple? There isn't any. You just go to the city. Well, how do we live? I don't know. They'd kick me off they'd revoke my guru license. If I were GBC, they'd kick me off the GBC. But that's basically how Prabhupada operated. Like, this deep faith in Krishna and a deep desire to make things happen. And, one sense you could say there was no other way to do it. He didn't have a big organization with lots of money and lots of qualified people. So how are you going to do it? So, yeah, I think at least it's good that we have this in our toolkit, that sometimes you just got to, your desire to make something happen is so strong. You just make it happen, even though there's no logical way you could see it happening. You just make it happen. That was the example. Hare Krishna. So we have Anuradha has a suggestion. Yeah. There's a pastime you told us some time ago. He saw a devotee. This devotee was eating meat at that moment, and Prabhupada asked him, when are you cooking for me? How is it possible that he did not care about his disciple breaking the principles? And he invited him to cook for him. But that disciple was his cook previously. And Prabhupada wanted to save him. So Prabhupada's love and compassion just like transcended. He was so great, it transcended like all other rules and regulations. Now, Prabhupada said, you can't imitate this if you're not qualified. Maybe if I tried to do that, maybe I'd get affected by it, by the consciousness of the cook. Prabhupada is not affected or not. If Prabhupada were affected, he wasn't affected, if you know what I mean. Right? If Prabhupada were infected by his cooking of this devotee, he would not be affected by the infection. Or maybe you could even say he would be affected by the infection, but he was willing to be affected by the infection to save this disciple. So really what this pastime is just like intense love for his disciple. And it was a method, a means to try to save him. And if you read Leela Amrita, you will see that Prabhupada had a lot of affection for his early disciples, especially because he knew them all on a first name basis. So it was like really like his own kids. And he would go out of his way often to try to save them. And, if somebody served Prabhupada, he didn't take that for granted. He appreciated it and he wanted to reciprocate. And also as spiritual master, he felt it is my obligation to deliver you. But especially for these early disciples, especially for those who personally served him. Generally, you would see this very strong affection. never taking it for granted, even though they've gone away. So I think that's a good example that you can't, you don't just write off somebody who's gone away. Maybe given up bhakti, you always have open arms for them that they want to come back, and you always appreciate. There's a story in which I think it was the story about one of Prabhupada's disciples who left after Prabhupada said they didn't go to the moon. It's like, this is too much. I can't take it. I don't know. It doesn't really matter for this story. But the essence of this story was that I think the disciple just wanted to, sometimes the disciple says, I'm leaving. Can I be released from my vows? And this connection is kind of like a divorce. And the Prabhupada said, yeah. And he was discussing it with his disciples. And he said, even though this devotee can't follow, it's better that he leaves in a friendly way, not that he leaves in an antagonistic way. So he was like, okay, best of luck, and I'm always here if you need me. So, that's also a manifestation of his compassion, isn't it? To some degree. Yes. So, I told another story. Prabhupada traveled to another island in Hawaii. Hawaii has many islands. So he was on the main island. Well, it's called Oahu. That's where the temple is in Honolulu. And then he went to another island to meet one of his early disciples who had left. And I don't know the condition of this disciple, but Prabhupada went and asked him, what did I do that caused you to leave? Like, did I hurt you? And basically, Prabhupada was apologizing. And the disciple didn't reciprocate. He didn't want to come back. I believe, if I remember the story correctly, that this devotee didn't say anything. Maybe he had nothing to say. He was very disassociated. Maybe he was high. I don't know. But he didn't say anything. And Prabhupada went all the way out there to save him. Isn't that amazing? He had this affection. Yeah. Hare Krishna. And then another time, Prabhupada heard in the news that his devotees in Pakistan had been killed. That was in the news. Brahmananda went to Pakistan, and his brother Gargamuni went to Bangladesh. And the Times of India, I think, reported they both had been killed. And Brahmananda and Gargamuni were like, the first devotees in New York. They were not killed, but there was violence going on. And I guess if they didn't get out of the country soon enough, they would have been killed. And they met Prabhupada in India. Prabhupada just embraced them like his sons had come back from the dead. Big hug. So, especially for those intimate disciples, early disciples, there was this deep affection. That's such a beautiful story that he would let this devotee cook for him. This devotee was not, I think he was following maybe one regulative principle, not gambling, probably. So not following three of them, and Prabhupada allowed him to cook in the hope that he could bring him back. Mm. Hare Krishna. So we have a suggestion here from Chaitanya Dasi. Prabhupada's simultaneous liberalism and strictness. Okay, so we can talk about that. This is difficult sometimes to emulate because you have to know when to be liberal and you have to know when to be strict. And if you get it mixed up, then you'll create problems. If you're strict when you should be liberal, You can lose devotees. And if you're liberal, when you be strict, you may not be able to correct the devotee. They'll be misguided. Correct? So the principle, the underlying principle of being strict or being liberal is the benefit of the devotee. So sometimes we're strict because the devotee needs that, because they're being whimsical. And unless Prabhupada is heavy, they don't get the message. You know how sometimes you get a message, but it's not delivered in a heavy way. So it kind of goes in one ear and out the other. But when it's delivered in a heavy way, it's like, oh, okay, this is important, right? That's human nature. So if Prabhupada saw that devotees were negligent, then he might see he has to get heavy and correct them. Um, Now, sometimes his heaviness was a manifestation of his love for Krishna, like a devotee would offend the deity in some way. And Prabhupada would be very upset that it's like I invite you to my home to stay as a guest, right? Then I go away and my wife decides I don't like you and she yells at you and doesn't cook for you. That kind of would upset me, don't you think? So we've invited Krishna as the deity in the temple, and the people who are supposed to take care of the deity do something wrong, improperly worship the deity. Prabhupada would be very upset out of his love for Krishna. I just read something the other day. Oh, Juliana and Dhanaraj, I have good news for you. There are no trace of cockroaches in my office. I'm looking around and see no cockroach still. Dhanaraj and Juliana are opening a new business. If you have cockroaches, it's called Have a Heart Cockroach Removal. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Well, I spoke too soon. But there's a reduction in the number. Yeah. Okay. That was a digression. So so I read this amazing thing. And Prabhupada, when he heard someone say that I am God, he would get so angry. And he said, Prabhupada said, it makes me so angry, I feel like kicking on their face with my boot. And Prabhupada said, I shouldn't say this. I could be arrested for this, but I don't care. This is how I feel. Wow. You know, it's like, you know, sometimes when you want, I don't know, I doubt in India this had happened, but in America, sometimes when you wanted to offend someone, you would say something bad about their mother. Your mother's a prostitute or your mother's a whatever, isn't it? Yeah. And so, when you say something bad about someone who's that close to you, you get angry, right? And it's said to make to offend the person. So when someone says, I'm God, that's like someone saying your mother's ugly or your mother's stupid or something. No, it's more like saying your mother doesn't have a form. She's just an energy. She has no head, arms, legs. God's impersonal. So it would anger Prabhupada. So that's a case where it's not even a consideration of strict or liberal. It's just I love Krishna and you're offending him, and I'm ready to kick you in the face. Not that we do it, but that's the feeling. Prabhupada is expressing that. And he's saying, I shouldn't say this. This is wrong, but this is how I feel. So, going back to the strictness and liberal, The interesting thing, what I think is one of the most interesting things, is you see in this world that people who are raised conservative in a conservative culture, a conservative environment, generally they remain either very conservative or they revolt against it and they become really liberal. Like, I want nothing to do with what my parents taught me. I'm going to be the opposite. Or they'll just be exactly the same, right? So it's quite common. We find this more so in India because generation gap is huge in India, much huger than it is. Generation gap does not really hardly exist in America because the parents are like as bad as their kids, or their kids are as bad as their parents. They're all kind of the same. But in India, there's such a difference between those like in their 50s and those in their 20s. And so you're raised in a certain way, and that's what you expect your kids to do the same thing, but they're not raised that way. Whereas if you go back 100 years, 200, 500,000, it was kind of like there weren't big generation gaps. The generation gap is huge now, right? Because the kids in the city are just like kids anywhere, but the parents are not. So generally you'll see that if you're raised a certain way, that's what you expect of your children. That you'll do, you know, you talk back to your mother, your kid talks back to you, and Brasastali, what's your reaction? I would never say that to my mother, right? That's your reaction. If I said that to my mother, I'd be arrested. They'd call the police and lock me up, you know? But then I'm not saying Karina has ever done that. Maybe Karina, you'll have that problem with your kids when you tell them to do something. I'm not going to do that. And you say, I would never tell my mother that. Well, you know, so it's the culture. So you usually, if you're conservative, you come from a conservative culture, generally you remain that way, right? Or if you're liberal or you're raised an atheist, you generally kind of like that. So it's so interesting, don't you think? That Prabhupada comes from a very traditional culture, India in the early 1900s, from a Vaishnava family. And then he comes to America and he can adapt in like these amazing liberal ways. If I didn't let the boys and girls intermingle and let the girls live in the ashram, and if I as a sannyasi didn't marry them, and I didn't create a brahmachari in the ashram, then we couldn't spread Krishna consciousness. All of which he was being criticized for doing because sannyasis don't do that. Women don't live in temples. Sannyasis don't marry people. Um, yeah. So when I look at that, I think that there's this huge degree of detachment. Like Prabhupada's not attached to conservative traditional ideas if they don't serve the purpose of making people Krishna conscious. But some people are attached to those ideas, be it conservative or liberal, without consideration of how it affects anybody. It's just, this is how it's done. And that's it. And if you don't like it, well, we'll see you later. Tough luck, you know. This is how it's done. But Prabhupada wasn't like that. Prabhupada was like, this is the culture in America, so we can't do it exactly the way we do it in India because it won't work. So we have to do it this way. So his detachment is that he's willing to be liberal, where liberal will be actually beneficial. But he's not going to be so liberal that he throws out tradition that you can't throw out. Because if you have no tradition, then you have no succession and longevity because there's nothing to fall on to. It's just you make it up as you go and nothing carries into the future. So you need both. And so you see that Prabhupada understood what you couldn't change. So you say, Prabhupada, if we change this, it'll be better. He's like, no, but you can't. If we just chant 4 rounds, then, and 3 principles, and, we can initiate the whole world. No, it's 16 and 4, right? Don't you think if you could only have 3 principles and 4 rounds, we could have like so many devotees initiated, right? Of course, if we did that, then devotees would say, can't we just chant 2 rounds and have 2 principles? It's like, where's it going to end? You know what I mean? Um, so Prabhupada I've always appreciated, because I don't think, I could be wrong, but I don't think there's many of his godbrothers that could have been able to deal with the West and know how to do this, you know, know when being liberal is good and know when being liberal is not good, and where to draw the line. And again, I think it goes back to the same idea with the devotee who was not following all the principles, and Prabhupada allowed him to cook for him. It's the same idea that my mission is to help you become Krishna conscious. My mission is to get you out of the material world. And what do we have to do to make that happen? And is this principle that we're not going to follow important enough that we have to follow it, even though you go to hell by us following it? Or is it not important enough that we can dispense of this principle because that's what's going to help the spreading of Krishna consciousness? That's how Prabhupada thought. And that requires a lot of detachment. For those of you who are conservative or liberal, you know how hard it is to like give up your principles, even when you see that it would be beneficial. I mean, you see this in politics, when how much you hate leaders who don't represent your values and how much you love those who do. So Prabhupada was so detached. It wasn't a matter of what he liked as much as what was beneficial, and also a sensitivity to what people needed and what they could do. That was there also, you know. So it was, I would say it was kind of weird for me because when I saw how Prabhupada was dealing with us, I would think, how does he know how to deal with us? He deals with us like he was born in America. Like, how does he know? It doesn't make sense that he would know. He shouldn't know. He should be dealing with us like, some conservative, archaic person from India who's got these values that no young people could relate to. And sometimes you'll see with these conservative values, Prabhupada would publicly, there's a lecture Prabhupada publicly talked about, defined illicit sex just for procreation. That was a public lecture. Why is he talking about that in public? Wow. So certain things, it was just like, this is public information. Sex for procreation. You're telling that to hippies. Like, I think that's the wrong audience for that. They stand for just the opposite. But he kind of knew what you had to, what principles you had to maintain and to who and what could be adjusted. So now, my dear devotees, we all have conservative and liberal leanings, even in this. Some of us have both at the same time. And some of us will change as we get older, might become more liberal or more conservative. But the lesson here is we have to be detached enough from what we believe is right to be able to do what is best for people. You know, what I believe is right and doing what is right may not be the same thing, although it may seem to be, but you actually have to you actually want to analyze, well, what is best for people, right? Correct. And if something is good for people, then we'll do it. That's the example. Hare Krishna. Okay. Mm. Juliana. Dhanaraj says, how Prabhupada chanted his rounds as a householder, 4 segments of 4 rounds throughout the day. For me, practical example how one makes time for japa. Yeah. 4 rounds in the morning, 4 rounds before, was it 4 rounds before breakfast, 4 before lunch? I don't know how you do that when you're starving. 4 before dinner and 4 before bedtime when you're tired. Ever try to chant when you're tired? So there's some bad rounds, right? Instead of meditating on Radha Krishna Leela, you meditate on the bedtime pastimes of yourself. When can I finish these rounds so I can go to sleep? But Prabhupada recommended for us, he actually recommended for us that we should finish our rounds before at 10 a.m. in the morning. So, but at least it's an example that no matter how busy he was, he chanted his rounds, but at least that much, right? Can say that. That's a whole other thing, right? I'm too busy to finish my rounds. Okay. Prabhupada chanted 16 every day as the founder Acharya of ISKCON. He was pretty busy. Are you more busy than Prabhupada was? Are you more busy than the GBC who've got unlimited problems to deal with at every moment of their lives? What to speak of their gurus at the same time? Have unlimited disciples with unlimited problems they have to deal with. Somehow they figure out how to chant 16 rounds a day. It's an inspiration, isn't it? Whenever you have an excuse, what I think is really important or powerful to do is imagine somebody else is in your life. So, whatever job you have, whatever relationship you have, wherever you live, whatever your responsibilities you have, you put someone else in that situation and say, would they make the same excuses that I'm making about not being able to do A, B, and C? And immediately realize, no, if I choose the right, I mean, you can choose the wrong person who would make more excuses than you. But if you choose the right person, you realize, no, that person would not have a problem shining their rounds in my life if I put them in my life. If they just took over my job, my relationships, my responsibilities, they'd have no problem. It can help you to kind of see through what the problem is, what excuses you're making, and so forth. It's time to celebrate, everyone. I'm going to take off my jacket. The room has officially warmed up. Now I might fall asleep on you, but at least I'll be warm. You remember a few days ago, I made a vow never to curse the cold, right? So if I ever curse the cold, remind me that I'm breaking my vow. Hare Krishna. And you guys who live in Europe, if you can't curse the cold because you'd be cursing all day, every day, 6 months a year, right? So I don't think, do you guys curse the cold in Europe? Or you do, yeah. Well, it doesn't make it any warmer, right? So I think we should all stop cursing the cold or cursing the heat or whatever. Mm. Yeah. So the message, what I'm trying to say, maybe I already said it. The message is sometimes it's necessary to be detached from our liberal nature or our conservative nature if it would interfere with what is best for another individual or best for the project or temple we're working on or working in or working with. So all you liberals, you're going to need to be conservative sometimes. And all you conservatives, you're going to need to be liberal sometimes. That's a big topic, isn't it? We could spend the next 6 months just talking about that. Hmm. Yeah. And then, um, we have all these biases accumulated in this world and before and other lifetimes. And sometimes when you have these biases, they're so deep and fixed, you you can't even see the world in any other way than those biases dictate. And that maybe okay for you, but it's not always okay for the people around you because it can cause you to become unreasonable and of course judgmental, unnecessarily judgmental, and perhaps um, unnecessarily, yeah, lopsided, basically. Your your like view of the world is like it's this, it's only this. There's no world out here? No, it doesn't exist, only this. Which of course is not true. Hare Krishna. Okay. Kamalochan said Prabhupada could see the future when Prabhupada heard about the makeshift structure in Juhu, where deities were installed, demolished by authorities. His response was not to worry. It's part of Krishna's plan. He was sure that the result will be positive. Yeah. It definitely seems like Prabhupada could see what his disciples couldn't see. And his disciples would become discouraged, but he wasn't. Plus, Kamalochan, there's another problem. When Prabhupada installed those deities, he said, I'm sorry for installing you in a shack, but I will build you a beautiful temple. So he made a vow to the deity. So now there's no question, right? He would fight, fight, fight till the end because he promised Krishna, I will build you a temple. That's a big promise. Yeah. It's really interesting. These three temples, Bombay, Vrindavan, and Bhubaneswar, there may be more. These are the three I know that were built, all were built in the middle of nowhere, who later they became the middle of everywhere. But you go to Vrindavan, the Krishna Balaram temple, and you don't know the history, you could never imagine that that was in the middle of nowhere. You go to Bhubaneswar, you could never imagine that was in the middle of nowhere because now it's in the middle of everywhere. And the same thing in Juhu. It's just, you couldn't imagine. And Prabhupada in all those three cases said, it will be the middle of everywhere. Don't worry. Interesting, right? Mm, yeah. So sometimes there was this disconnect between Prabhupada and his disciples because Prabhupada could see what they couldn't see. And so sometimes they questioned Prabhupada's decision, like, why is he doing this? Because they couldn't see the future, in the future, how it would be. And I think sometimes, Kamalochan, Prabhupada's vision of the future may have been like a real estate developer. He just knew this place is going to develop. It may not be that, Krishna showed him Juhu and, 20, what it's going to look like in 2025. But he just knew this is the movie stars all live out here. It's got beaches. Mumbai is growing. It's crowded. It's just, it has to grow out. As all cities, they grow out. If you have any money, buy land just outside the city because eventually it'll grow out. And you'll get land cheap and then you'll cash in 20, 30 years. All us old timers, we all sit around and go, I should have bought land and such when it was cheap, but I thought no one would live there. Now it's the middle of everywhere, you know. Yeah. Okay. So Karina says, I do suffer from that problem a little. She's referring to the generation gap where she tells her kids, I would never do that. Or maybe she told, I don't know, is it your kids or you told your mother? I'm not gonna, yeah. Anyway, um, one thing, this is my experience, that in my old age, don't worry, I don't feel like I'm old, but by numbers, it's old, right? So there are many like conservative principles that I appreciate. Like these are like, this is what works. Everything else doesn't work, even though it seems like that's so conservative, traditional, archaic. You know, we were all hippies when we were young and we rejecting everything. But we see some of these principles, they're like the only thing that works. Everything else is like just people's idea, just to increase their sense gratification. But in the end, it doesn't work. You know, like you may have heard like women's liberation, you know, women wanted all the power. And then they realized that it's not really, doesn't really make them happy, you know. It's just one example I've heard. I can't say it's 100% true, but I was told that the woman who headed the women's liberation movement realized that later on that this is not really what women want exactly, the way they proposed it. So all of you very liberal devotees out there, when you get older, you might become a little more conservative. Or maybe the conservatives will become a little more liberal, hopefully. Hare Krishna. I have a question from Parananda. Your wisdom is interesting story in today's lecture. I have a question about liberality and conservative. What do you say about such theses that we have to be conservative and make vows for principles for initiates, devotees, and chant 16 rounds, and can English is not his first language. I'm trying to figure out that word. Liberally, for some idea, for preaching ways and being liberally for treating others. Well, one thing that Prabhupada said is that initiation is not for everybody. So I think he's asking, you know, for the future, could we be more liberal in the way we initiate people? Maybe 3 principles, 4 rounds, 3.5 principles, 4 rounds, something like that. Or chant as many rounds as you can. How many rounds should I chant? As many as you can. How many principles? Well, at least 2. Well, at least 3. And you can, you know, try to follow the other one as best you can. So you could do that. The problem that I see with that is that Prabhupada never indicated that. He just indicated that if you can't follow it all, then don't do it until you can. And, you know, just continue your Krishna consciousness. Nobody's going to force you to do it. Well, they shouldn't. You might get forced by peer pressure or social pressure within ISKCON, or even philosophical pressure. If I don't get initiated, my life's wasted. But Prabhupada never, he, as far as I know, Prabhupada never asked anybody, or he rarely asked, do you want to get initiated? It was always people asking him. So he wasn't going out canvassing for disciples or showing that everyone had to be initiated. Like he didn't come to a temple and say, well, how many of you are not initiated? And for all those who raised their hand, he didn't say, well, you should be initiated. It wasn't like that. It really, one time Prabhupada said, I never asked you to wear dhoti. You asked me if it was okay if we could wear them. Did you know that? Dhoti. What's a dhoti? It's a dhoti, pronounced properly. Dhoti is a dhoti pronounced properly, in case you didn't know. It's not called a dhoti. It's called a dhoti. Right? Dhoti kurta. What's a kurta? It's a kurta, pronounced kurta. 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 Kurda. I forget. I was been corrected on my kurta pronunciation. Kurta. Kirta. Kurta. Yeah. So initiation is something that one should do when they're ready. It should not be that the guru is pushing, you should be initiated. That their mentors are pushing, you should be initiated. That people are pushing. And this idea, well, we could lower the number and make it easier. And I've thought about it a lot. And I like the idea, but it was not an idea that Prabhupada gave us that we could do. So no matter how much we like it or how great an idea we think it is, as long as we're in ISKCON, we can't do it. If we want to do it, we'd have to leave ISKCON. Then you can do whatever you want. And no one's going to bother you. But following, what Prabhupada did and what he taught, he never said 16 rounds, 4 principles. In the future of Kali Yuga, when things are really bad, you can reduce it as necessary. He never said that. Not that I'm aware of, right? Oh, it's going to, 5,000 years from now, it's going to be so bad. Definitely 4 rounds, 3 principles. The only way it's going to work. I think from what I saw with Prabhupada, I felt like it was a prescription. Like you get a prescription, you need to take so much of vitamin C, whatever, 100 milligrams, 1,000 milligrams, 5,000. Vitamin D, I think on my bottle of vitamin D, it says like 10 quadrillion milligrams. If you take a lot of vitamin D, it's supposed to fight depression, especially when there's no sun in the winter. So, and they'll tell you, if you want to, vitamin D can solve some problems, but you have to overdose on it for a while. So that's how I see it. It's like a prescription, 16 rounds, 4 principles. Like I'd like to give you less, but less is not going to cure you. You need a certain amount of vitamin D or whatever vitamin you have. You need a certain amount. And if you take less, then it's not going to be effective. That's the way I see it. Prabhu, can I take less vitamin japa? No, 16,000 milligrams. And 4,000 milligrams of regular principles and 16,000 milligrams of japa. That's the prescription that Prabhupada gave. That's why we don't change it. If you can't take that much, you can't afford the vitamins, you can't digest it, your body has a reaction, then don't take that much. Nobody's going to force you. But if you want to be fully healthy, you have to get your body to be able to take that much. That's how I see it. And from all the ways Prabhupada explained it, that's why I've come to that conclusion, because he never backed off on it. And devotees definitely asked him, from time to time, can we do less than 16? And he said, in emergency, maybe. You got an invitation to meet the President of the United States, and you got to be there in 2 hours, and you got the invitation at 5 in the morning, then you got to pack your bag and, you're not going to get your rounds done maybe that day. Okay, that's a special case. But other than that, this is the prescription. So to give someone less of a prescription, that's okay, as long as you don't tell them it's enough. It's a start. Take it. It's better than nothing. And your body will get used to it so you can take more. But you want to build up to the full prescription, the full dose. That's the idea. Does that make sense? Raise your hand if you don't like what I said. Darn, I thought I could get by with 4 and 3. You ruined my day. You rained on my parade. No. I think this is the best way to see it. 4 rounds and 3 principles. It's better than no rounds and no principles, and will get you to 16 rounds and 4 principles, right? So no one's arguing with that. So you do something. That's good. Some vitamin D is better than no vitamin D. But if you have certain conditions you want to clear up, you got to take a lot of vitamin D, according to what I've been told. Of course, 10 years from now, you'll go on YouTube and they go, "We were all wrong. Too much vitamin D gives you cancer." I mean, that goes on also, right? But anyway, assuming that it's correct, I think it's a good example. Abhishek, how to deal with having double standards for yourself and others, being more hard on either one more than the other. Well, Prabhupada said if you're going to be hard on one or the other, it should be yourself. Because if you're hard on other people and not on yourself, then you're like hypocritical. Prabhupada did not want us to be hard on others. I mean, if you're a teacher, spiritual master, mentor, you might have to be. But in general, it was always like, correct yourself. Don't worry about others so much. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta said something kind of amazing. He said, you can't really help others. It's not like you're the reformer of the world. And then he said, you can't make anyone a devotee because everyone is already a devotee. You can just help them realize they're a devotee. And Krishna is the ultimate reformer, right? So, like Abhishek, look at Prabhupada. He was like light years above all of us. So compared to him, we were just like one constant mistake after another, right? Like our existence was just mistakes compared to him, right? As conditioned souls who are not trained as devotees, we do everything wrong. Say the wrong thing, eat with the wrong hand, go down the list. Well, if you're right-handed, you're okay. But you shouldn't touch your prasadam with your left hand. Did you know that? Did you know that, all you left-handed devotees? And all you Brits who eat with fork and knife and you cut everything, If you go to England, they're all like, Jamie, is that why you're trained? Yeah. Malecha. Jamie's a Malecha. He eats with 2 hands. Like, send him to Malecha Loka, with all the other Brits. They're hopeless. So, and you have your new bhaktas, right? When you're a new bhakta, you've been in the temple 3 days, and then another bhakta joins, and they touch prasadam with their left hand, and you scream at them. Have you seen that? It's like, yeah, that tendency, right? So, don't you think it's interesting that Prabhupada, this pure devotee, raised in this culture, he comes to Malecha Desh, all of us don't know anything, and he's like extremely patient with us. Don't you think that's interesting? You know, Prabhupada once said, if I told you all the rules of deity worship, you'd faint. Like you couldn't do them all. Take a bath, you go outside, wash your dhoti, do this, take 3 baths a day, say these mantras, etc., etc. So he's very patient with us. So, uh, yeah. And how can you correct anybody if you don't yourself are not an example? And if you're an example, why do you need to correct them? Because they see your example. My little joke is you're chanting japa and you're noticing how everybody's spacing out. You're looking around the temple, you go, they're spacing out. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. This is how they're chanting Krishna, Krishna. Oh, they're spacing out. Like, hello, you're looking at everybody spacing out. What does that mean you're doing? So sometimes it's like that. The very thing you want to correct people, you're doing yourself and you don't even realize it. You ever think like that when you chant japa, that others are spacing out? That's a Bhakta Burfi moment if I ever saw one. How come everyone's spacing out when they chant japa? What's wrong with them? Hare Krishna, Krishna. Hey, you should be chanting, hearing. Hare Krishna. Look at that. He's spacing out. Why are you spacing out? Hare Krishna. And who's spacing out more? Bhakta Burfi, more than anybody. Hare Krishna. Oh, the world is funny. Bhakta Burfi makes us laugh at our stupidity. Yeah. But Abhishekan, in one sense, you could say, you have no right to correct anybody unless you yourself are doing it. But, work on yourself. Don't worry so much about others. It's an interesting question why you worry about others more than yourself. Because it's hard to change ourselves. So let me try to change you, because, that's more fun than trying to change me, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. Can we discuss biases with some examples? Subtle biases the devotees have. Um, well, this could get me in trouble if I mention them. The biases are going to be cultural. So if you come to America and you spend time here and you see how the temples are run and you see the values by which the temples are run, and you're from India, then you'll understand. If you are Indian, you will understand your biases and your culture much better if you come to a Western country, because they don't do all the same things you do. And then you'll start, why are they doing that? Then you'll start to understand, oh, this is my culture. This is what I value. And what you value may be better, but it may have a negative effect on how you see others. That's the problem. Like often when we do a japa course, I do a disclaimer, or really any course, and it's really interesting. And my disclaimer is when you learn the right way to do something, you're going to notice all the people who are doing it the wrong way. Have you ever had that experience? You learn the right way to do something, and all of a sudden, you notice everybody who's doing it wrong. So you go to a japa retreat, japa workshop, and you learn the right way to chant japa. The next morning, when you go to the temple to chant japa, you're going to see a lot of people chanting the wrong way. And you could end up like Bhakta Burfi, freaking out. So there's liability in learning what's right because it can turn you against people who don't do it. So I don't think, biases are a part of life, but it's how you deal with them that becomes the problem. Like, this is the only way. My mother taught me this, and that's it. And anyone who doesn't do that is a huge demon, and they deserve to have their head cut off. You know, that's a problem. As opposed to, well, this is America. They never learned to do it that way. They don't do it that way, but they're sincere devotees and they're trying. And this doesn't really matter that much, you know, right? Like if you're offering something like Damodar, right? In America, you'll offer with one arm. In India, you'll offer with two, right? Generally, because two is better than one. So you offer with both. But Americans don't know that unless they lived in India and seen it, right? If you go to India, they'll offer 3 drops for Tulsi, isn't it? 3. And then they'll touch Tulsi, which is bad. Prabhupada said, don't touch it. They don't like touch it. But he said, you're bothering Tulsi by touching her. Anyway, they'll do 3 drops because 3 is auspicious. Except Prabhupada said, you give 3 things to your enemy. So someone's your enemy and they come over for lunch, serve them 3 chapatis. Well, I don't know where this all comes from. If you ever serve me 3 chapatis, then I will know you are my enemy. Um, but you learn these things, and so then you come to America and nobody does 3, and nobody does this, and a million other things they don't. And occasionally you'll see a woman offering dandavats. It's rare, but you might. And so I don't think the problem is having that cultural, um, what's the word? Like I was going to say inauguration. That's not the word. But what's the word? When I need a foreign non-English speaking person to tell me the word. It's like a samskar. You have these impressions. You have so many cultural impressions. They may be good, they may not be good. The problem is, how do you react to people who don't do that or don't believe in it? That's where the problem comes. Even if you're right and they're wrong. I'm right and you're wrong, therefore I'm justified in slapping you in the face. No, I'm not. That's kind of, that thinking? Because you're wrong and I'm right, I'm justified in abusing you. You know that? You're not justified in abusing anybody. So that's where biases come in. They can be, they can abuse people or in some way minimize or harm or discourage. Right? Yeah. You're good. That's German in case you don't know. You're good. Right? Is that German? You're good. Das ist gut. That's all I can say in German. The only thing I can say in German is Das ist good and my name, which is German. Not my devotee name. Yeah. Um, hmm. Well, one of the biggest biases we have are biases towards certain cultures, certain ethnicities, isn't it? So you may grow up thinking that your caste or your country or your clan or your religion or your race is superior, which many of us do because that's what our parents believe and they tell us that. So it's generational bias, right? And so then you may grow up, these are all the races we don't like. So then you grow up not liking them because your parents said they're bad. And so the problem is when you start examining your biases, you realize you got a lot of them programmed in there that don't make any sense. But when you see that ethnicity, you think, oh my God, it's a German. Ah, then you run across the street, because we're Americans and you know what, or I'm Jewish. So it's like, do I have a bias against Germans? You know, Jewish people do. I like Germans. You guys are cool. But, you know, some Jewish Americans don't think that way naturally. So you want to examine your biases because your biases may have nothing to do with reality. They're just, right? They're just programming what you got from, you know, it's like, we're going to hold Carolyn and Anna responsible for the Holocaust, just like you're going to hold me responsible for slavery in America because I'm a white fascist pig because I'm American. And I was born in a kind of, what do they call that? What's the privileged, white privilege? You have white privilege. I don't like you, right? So you got all these names to designate all these people you don't like, and you don't even know the people. And the devotee is samadarshana, darshana. It's like devotee is equal to everybody, even an insect. What to speak of humans? That's a big one, don't you think? I mean, if you actually did a, you know, an inventory of all your biases, and then you think that what to speak of human biases, we're supposed to be equal even to an ant, to a mosquito. Like, there's a devotee, he has a program. He has I don't know if it's 5,000. He has, I don't know, maybe it's 5,000. He has prasadam water and he has a route and he goes and he waters trees with prasadam like every week. And he has an Excel database and keeps track of all the trees. So he's watering trees with prasadam water. Wow. That's samadarshana, equal vision. That's interesting, isn't it? So bias and equal vision are opposite ends of reality. So Prabhupada comes from Vrindavan to America to see the hippies, and he loves them. And they're malechas by fate extent. You know what a malecha is? It's a meat eater. It's an outcast. So Prabhupada is loving the outcast, in spite of all the bias and prejudice, probably that was indoctrinated in him, right? He went to Africa. Where are the Africans? There were only Indians. Where are the Africans? I'm preaching to the Africans. In spite of all the bias and prejudice that exists in the world against African or African Americans or African Europeans or whatever, right? He wanted to go to South America, to Mexico. In America, we make so many jokes about Mexicans. If there's a repair job and it's not done well, we say it's a Mexican job because it's like second class. That's just the bias, the prejudice, right? And I was in Mexico. There was some repair that didn't go well, and I said, it's a Mexican job, which it was because it was in Mexico. It's just kind of funny. So that kind of bias. So if you know, if you think about your bias, you realize how many you have that you're not even aware of, right? And Prabhupada goes to Mexico, no bias, loves the people. Goes to Latin America, Venezuela. You think, yeah, goes to Venezuela, loves the people. Goes back to India. These are his people, loves them, but he loves everybody equally. Wants to go to China, wants to go to Russia. No bias. Chinese people. I don't like Chinese people. I don't like the way they talk. Do you? I don't like it. You know, that was not Prabhupada. It was never like that. Go to China, go to Russia, go everywhere. So we all have biases, but the question is, are you keeping them? And what are you doing with them? And you're supposed to be Samadarshana. And Samadarshana for us means we equally give Krishna consciousness to everybody. That's Samadarshana. I'm not giving it to you because you are a blank. And I don't like blanks. So no mercy for you. He didn't think like that. Rather, he thought, how do we give the mercy to everybody? And that's how Lord Chaitanya thought, right? Yes? Mercy for everyone. Hare Krishna. Wow. That's that is another 6-month class, you know, discovering your own biases. Don't think you don't have any. You have to have them from your culture. Right? Now, if you're born in America, like I joke and say, we Americans don't think we're better than everybody else. We know we're better than everyone else. That's how Americans think. You know? Is there any other country, you're in America and you talk about like some other country, you're like, oh, where's that? There's no other country that's important. It's just us. And everybody should serve us because we're the best, right? So that's what you get. I have a lot of devotee friends who are Jewish, and we joke, say, well, of course we know we're smarter than everybody else. Yeah. And, Israel has more patents per capita than any place in the world. And the Jews make, the most money. Yeah. So you can go with that one. And in India, you can go with, well, we're more spiritually advanced. We're more cultured, right? In Germany, we make better cars. We've got engineering shakti, you know. We were interested in Sanskrit. You Americans were not into this. The German scholars were into Sanskrit. And then if you're Russian, you can go, there's so many Sanskrit words in the Russian language. So we are, that's, just an advantage we have over all of you. So, you can just go on and on, have a reason that you're better. And we're trying to become more humble than a blade of grass. Why would we need reasons for being better when you're trying to become servant of the servant? But that's our conditioning, right? And then go out and do something amazing. That'll give you a reason to feel better than everybody. Look what I did. What have you done, Prabhu? Nothing. You're a loser. Look what I've done. So it's like bias is so natural because as conditioned souls, we're just trying to be better than everybody. That's our MO. That's what we live for. Right? Hare Krishna. Okay, Chaitanya Dasi, it's time to save. Oh, we have a good question. Hold on. Karina says, religious people often become self-righteous, judgmental, resentful, condemning, etc., as they see more faults in others. Prabhupada never displayed that kind of attitude. Yes, you are right. 100%. Fabiana has a question. Is one's life really wasted if one doesn't get initiated? If you don't, I've mentioned before something that I think is valuable. I met Prabhupada when I was 19. And I've said before, if I died the day after I met Prabhupada, I would consider my life a success. So you've come to Krishna consciousness, your life is a success. Chant 16 rounds, follow the principles if you can, and accept someone as your guru if you can, if there is somebody. And once you accept that person and accept the principles, that's as good as being initiated. And then when you're ready, you can do it someday, maybe tomorrow, 10 years, 50 years, whatever. It's something you should aspire for when you're ready. So qualifications for second initiation, we discussed that in yesterday's class. You could listen to that. Is it possible to become Krishna conscious without proper training in the temple? Doesn't have to be in the temple, but the proper training has to be there. That's for sure. Inculcation, yeah. Inculcation. Yeah. Prabhupada says, there's a quote, right? If you have understood this Krishna philosophy, if you have decided that you will take Krishna consciousness seriously and preach the philosophy to others, that is your initiation. Haribo. Don't take initiation until you're ready. And when you're ready, do not avoid initiation. How's that for a mantra? Sound good? Sounds good to me. Hare Krishna. Of course, I never asked to be initiated. I was told, go down and get initiated. That's how it was in those days. Bhakta Martin, you're going to be initiated next week by Prabhupada. Okay, sounds good. Hare Krishna. Okay, thank you very much. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna. Yes. Go Premanandi. Hari Hari Bol.